Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Sunday, which makes it Jesus Day, October 12th, 2025, episode 487. And we're going to read from Luke chapter 12, verses 15 to 21. Then he said to them, "Beware and be on your guard against every form of greed, for not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man was very productive, and he began reasoning to himself, saying, 'What shall I do, since I have no place to store my crops?' Then he said, 'This is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat and drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your soul is required of you, and now who will own what you have prepared?' So is the man who stores up treasures for himself and is not rich toward God." Amen. All right. As you know, it's Jesus Day up on this channel. And my school is having an October break, which I haven't had for the last 2 years, but it's great. But I'm planning on sleeping for a majority of it. And when I'm awake, I'm just going to be doing math, man. It's just the way it is. But anyway, so let's get to it, shall we? Whenever the Bible talks about money, greed, material wealth, covetousness, people say that the response should be something like charity, right? Oh, that person should have engaged in charity. But particularly in the United States, should this be the required response? I mean, why not suggest education? Why not suggest freedom? And if charity is not always the right response, then what is? And yes, I'm saying that charity is not always the correct response, like giving money to the poor, feeding the hungry. That is not always the correct response. And I've talked about this before. You're basically setting up a moral hazard. So, what is it to be rich towards God? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, first, let's remember what wealth is. And maybe some of you already know, but a lot of people in my church, they don't. So, I talked about wealth a little bit. Wealth is just basically the sign that we are doing things which have value, right? We're making something that has value. We're performing a service that has value. And so people are compensating us. The principle is that the wealthier you are, the more value you are creating. And we measure value these days by money. So people used to use possessions as money, as in the case of the rich guy in the parable that Jesus shared with us in verse 15. The problem with most possessions is that over time, they lose value, right? They become old or they break or you can't eat it no more. So, for example, if your wealth was in cows, well, cows, they don't live forever. And I don't know anything about cows, but maybe their meat is not as good at a certain time as another time. So there's an optimal time for you to sell a cow or to value a cow, and then it just is downhill from there. Uh, let's see, and if we were to use a contemporary example, it'd be houses. So people buy a house, and the conventional wisdom today is that it goes up in value over time. But this is not true. This is only a more recent phenomena with more regulations of zoning and building rights and things like that. But historically, houses go down in value, right? They get old, and unless you're continually maintaining them, uh, they fall apart. And so most possessions lose value over time, which is why people eventually gravitated to gold and silver for money, right? And the whole "What Has Government Done to Our Money" book that I've talked about several times in the past. You know, that's why we use gold and silver. Vince Lancy, he mentioned earlier this week that what made gold so great, I can't explain it the way he did, but the futures price is taking into account the commodity, right, plus time and any other risk that's involved. But gold, see, it's always going to be gold in the future, right? There's no spoilage, there's no like bug that can go in and eat all your gold. You know, there's nothing like that. And this is what makes gold so great for money. Same with silver. But for 50 years, people forgot, and governments have tried to hide the fact that gold and silver are money. And now it's coming back. Perhaps you've noticed that gold crossed the 4,000 threshold and silver popped up above $51 last week. So it's interesting times, right? People are bringing back actual money. And if they succeed in doing that, then we can measure value, real value, properly once again. So, in other words, everything moving forward has to be valued against gold and silver. Like, what is, uh, you know, the price or what is the value of the activity that I just engaged in. Right now, there's a lot of confusion, particularly because of virtue signaling and inflation. Everything has been distorted. So once gold and silver reestablish themselves, then the pricing of everything is going to change. It will reveal where the true value is. But in the meantime, in dollar terms, everything looks like it's going up. But that's inflation, and inflation is a lie, right? There's no value there. There's only printing of paper, right? Printing pretty pictures and colors on, cotton fiber reinforced paper. But that's all it is. You're just printing more paper. And the more you print, the less value that the paper has. It's like I use an example for my older church members that if you only have a bowl of soup, but there's 50 people you got to feed, you could just add water, but of course you dilute the water. And that's kind of what happens with inflation, right? The value is diluted. You have more bowls of soup, but there's very little nutritional value, and the taste is hardly soup. So real money is something that holds value and has a use and use. Dollars don't do that, and arguably cryptos don't either. But of course, cryptos have value as a speculative asset. So if you want to hold cryptos, then have at it. So the question really is, why is there inflation, right? If inflation is so bad, and it leads to so many other problems like war. Why is there inflation? Like no one who's holding on to dollars likes inflation. Well, it's because of greed. It's because of sin, right? Sin has made people greedy, and the greed has led to inflation. So if we were to look at verse 15, it says, "Beware and be on your guard against every form of greed, for not even when one has an abundance, does his life consist of his possessions." In other words, people want more possessions. They want more stuff without working. And inflation is the way. And so inflation is theft. And worse still is that it's theft and right under the noses of people. People don't even realize it's happening. The theft is occurring, but they feel it eventually. Verse 16, Jesus shares a parable and he says, "The land of a rich man was very productive. He began reasoning to himself, saying, 'What shall I do since I have no place to store my crops?' Then he said, uh, then he said, 'This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build larger ones, and I will store all my grain and my goods.'" And so basically, the US is like this rich man of the parable, only the US is much worse, right? Think about it. The United States has all the resources that it could possibly need. It has uranium, it even has gold and silver. I mean, it's got everything. It's got oil, it's got wood, it's got all this stuff, right? It's got coal. right? Coal up the wazoo. But so it's like the rich man living on really good land. It has everything it needs, but nope, not enough, right? But instead of just storing it in silos and warehouses, no, no, no. The US wants to control the whole world, right? Control the whole world and not have to do any work, right? So we print the money, fund armies, and no one works, right? It's just all the other countries have to work. So, in other words, the United States wants to be lazy, just like the rich guy in the parable. Like, hey, build bigger barns. I'm not going to sell my grain. I'm just going to keep it so that I can consume it myself and never have to work another day in my life. Right? That's basically the theory that he's going on. Uh, and so the United States, basically not satisfied with all of the wealth here in country, wants to expand and seize the wealth of other countries so that people in America don't have to work, right? That basically is the name of the game now. But this is not what life is about. Life is not about possessions. It's not about money. It's not about eating or drinking, and it's not even about work, your job. But because of greed and ignorance, people fall into sin, they fall into temptation, and money and possessions become the idol. And for that, there's no blessing. I mean, think about it. The United States, for the sake of money and possessions, we go to war all of the time, except it's much, much worse. The United States has to make up reasons to go to war. I mean, after failing in Afghanistan, failing in Yemen, failing in Iraq, failing in Somalia, you name it, we failed. Failure after failure after failure. The United States has decided that, yeah, we need to pick on a country more on their level. And so now we're looking at Venezuela to have a war, right? Venezuela is an impoverished country. They are poor. They have very little military to speak of. And the United States says, yeah, this is a fair fight. And so, to further the narrative, people are, murdering, like Trump is murdering people on boats, claiming that they're drug dealers. Maybe they are, but it just doesn't add up. And besides, drugs don't come from Venezuela. That's not their primary export. A lot of the drugs come from Canada and from Mexico, duh. But you won't see the United States trying to wage war against either of those countries, at least not for now. So by focusing only on possessions, invariably you will always end up with war, right? That's where it takes you. Materialism, focusing only on material, getting more stuff. Well, now you're going to have war, right? Even like the countries that make all the stuff for you, you don't like how they're making it, you don't like how they're getting rich off of you. And so then you try to bully them, which is what the United States is doing with China and India. Yeah, that's not going to go well at all. But that's what happens when you're fixated only on possessions, like the rich guy in the parable. This is what happens. Now, I say it all of the time that uh, it's by faith that believers have to live, and it's by faith that believers do not live in the way that people of the world live, right? We don't live only with the knowledge of sin. We live with the truth of Jesus Christ, the truth which is Jesus Christ. And he has shown us that the world is not the end or the goal, but it's only something temporary. And we don't live for the temporary. We don't live for the material world. We live for the eternal. And Jesus, through his sacrifice, has set us free from the material world by giving us true hope, right? By having true knowledge, we live for things which are truly meaningful. We live for what is eternal, and that gives us hope, right? Hope for that which is eternal, hope for the things which are far better than anything in this world. I don't care how beautiful things are in this world. And there are many things which are truly insanely beautiful. It can't compare with the eternal. Okay. But our sin leads us to temptation, right? We desire material things of the world, and those material things lead us away from God. Now, you might be tempted to say that money is everything, right? You'll get everyone eventually with money. Yeah, maybe, probably not everyone. And the point I like to make is that everyone is different. Whatever that weakness you have, that temptation which gets you every single time, right? Unless you're like training yourself to resist it, is different for every person, right? So, like, I know for a fact my father was never tempted by money. There were so many times where he could have just focused on money and wealth and just been really wealthy, and I wouldn't have to worry about things, but then I wouldn't have be the person I am. And so that's the thing. So wealth was never his thing, but everyone has something, right? Maybe it's fame, maybe it's power, maybe it's their family. And for a lot of Asians, it's family, right? People will compromise their faith for the sake of family. They'll lie for their family. They'll betray people for their family, for the sake of their family. I've seen it, right? And so, whatever that is, that's idolatry, right? Something that you hold more precious and valuable than God, right? So, it's not always money, it can be anything, it can be your kids. But whatever you put as more important than God. That is your idol. That is your temptation. That is your weakness. Uh, and so having many possessions in and of itself is not necessarily sinful and evil, right? Remember, having lots of money just means, traditionally, historically speaking, means that you are doing something which produces value for other people. So they're going to pay you to do it so they can have it, whatever that is, whether it's a service or a product. And that's how you create wealth, right? You are creating value for other people. And so people are going to pay you for that value. And that is how you garner wealth. But we have to always remember uh, that in this world, the money, right, the wealth is not the goal. And living well here in this world is vanity. That means it's not truly what is meaningful and it's all temporary. And so therefore it's vain. Everything is just temporary. And verse 20, it says, "But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your soul is required of you. And now who will own what you have prepared?'" So one of the things that we can never know is when we are called uh, to die and to face judgment. We don't know. So whenever someone asks me about rapture and you know, um, second coming of Jesus and stuff like that, I'm like, dude, you don't know when you're going to die. Someone might establish a date for 10 years from now, but if you die next year, then what? Right? So to me, no matter how you look at it, whether you believe in rapture, whether you believe in, being called by God in some uh, cataclysmic, miraculous event, you always have to be ready for judgment every day of your life. And so, yeah, it might be nice that Jesus is coming next year, but if I die tonight, I got to be ready. Right. So it's not about possessions. It's not about your wealth. It's about your faith. And let's see. So the goal was never money. It's never possessions. It's eternal life. And so the name of the game or the game that you should be playing, engaging in, participating in is preparation for judgment, right? Preparing for that day we appear before God. He's on the judgment seat. What are we going to say? And some people are like, well, I'll just defer to Jesus. Yeah, well, yeah, but I mean, you can't just say, well, Jesus is going to advocate for me, so therefore I don't have to learn anything. No, that's not what we should always be striving to become more Christ-like, to more like God, to be like God in our lives, which means, right? You can't be lazy. You can't be lazy and say, well, Jesus will take care of it for me, so I don't have to really work in my faith. I don't really have to know what's right and wrong because, Jesus will take care of it for me. Uh-uh. Doesn't how it go. It's not how it works, right? Uh, in other words, what God has given to us, how we use it is really important. God didn't bless us to live in the United States so that we can become lazy. And this is basically what the dude, the rich guy in our passage was trying to do. He was like, I'm going to store everything up and I'm not going to sell anything. I'm just going to consume it myself and I'll have stuff for years. I don't have to do any work at all anymore. And so the man who stores up wealth, treasure for himself is not rich towards God. Well, hey, storing up wealth so you can be lazy, so you can stop working and just goof around. See, I don't know whether or not that, you know, means that you truly understand the message of Jesus Christ. So, what does it mean to be rich toward God? Right? So if you are trying to amass wealth so you can become lazy, right? Which are basically politicians, right? I mean, they're the utmost lazy people in the world, right? Do no work at all except meddle in other people's lives and then profit off of the decisions that they make. I mean, come on, that's as lazy as it gets, right? And evil lazy too, to boot. But what is it to be rich towards God? It means that our priority and our lives are for the glory of God. It means that we live honestly and diligently, right? We keep our promises. We don't betray other people. We constantly try to improve and teach people how to improve. In other words, we're solving problems, right? Solving problems is improving our lives. That's what, life should be about, not about, oh, let someone else work out these problems. No, you have to do your own problems yourself. In the same way, each of our temptations are unique to us, so the problems that we have are unique to us. And we do this by growing in our faith, right? As you learn and understand the Word of God more deeply, see that now you start to see things differently, right? And I'll give myself as an example. When I was younger, I got hung up with issues of justice, and I decided that I was going to explain or explore issues of justice through racism, right? Use racism as the phenomena, the focus of my study. And hopefully, you know, I'll figure out justice. And so studying racism led me to issues of justice. Studying issues of justice led me to issues of economics. Studying economics, then, getting to know economics, led me to politics. And some people get really bothered by me being so political and talking about politics so much, but it's all related, right? Everything is related. Politics does not stand independent of economics. It doesn't stand independently of racism. It doesn't. It's all part of each other, right? And what's so funny is when I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, Lyndon Johnson basically made it illegal to talk about politics in the church, and all these stupid Christians who didn't understand life went along with it, right? I mean, Romans 13, got to obey the government. No, Romans 13 is so abused. It does not say that we obey unjust laws. It doesn't mean that we remain in ignorance of the true nature of the laws that are being imposed upon us. I mean, come on. But now, and for the last 50 years, you have all these people in the Christian church being totally oblivious of what's going on in the world because, hey, politics, right? Can't mix religion and politics. You can't have politics coming into your church. And so people are clueless. They have no idea what's going on in the world today. And this is horrible. The people of God should not be ignorant of what goes on in the world. The people of God should be out there solving problems, not letting these politicians pretend to solve problems for us. And then, all of a sudden we're saying, oh, religious persecution. No, we don't do that. Okay. We have to know what's going on in the world. We have to totally understand what people are saying so then we can make a decision whether or not to go along with it or to reject it. Um, so how we understand all of these things and what's going on in the world, it changes us, right? We make different choices. We have different goals. Our lives become different, right? So all of this knowledge influences everything, every aspect of our lives. That's what always surprises me that, and I should know better, but it always surprises me that when I'm going to a so-called Christian situation, I'm surprised by all the bad behavior, right? And it's because, I'm always so naive and hopeful that there are no nominal Christians. There are no people who just say they're Christians, but really don't care about Christianity itself. Always gets me. But that's the thing. The more you grow in your faith, the more that the life you live is different. Um, Now, not growing in faith and focusing only on possessions, not the problems of the world, uh, you know, on possessions, uh, focusing only on possessions lead us to the kind of world that we have today, right? Greed, inflation, corruption, ruin. We gave Israel $30 billion over the last 2 years, but we gave Ukraine 130 billion for what? Nothing of value, just to murder people, to destroy things. There's no value created in war. There's nothing. And I've talked about how World War II did not pull the United States out of recession, the Great Depression, okay? But it was peacetime that did that. But so the United States right now, that's their business model, war, right? We don't like what someone is doing, we bully them, and if they don't bend to our will, then we're going to drop some bombs on them. This is not for benefit. This is not good. This doesn't improve anyone's life. This doesn't solve anyone's problems except the problems of politicians, which, if you understand the big picture, that no politician actually benefits from it, right? What they're doing is just creating a whole lot of evil. So keeping faith in this context, in this kind of climate, is really, really hard. Keeping faith is very hard. And uh, so to be able to keep our faith in and of itself is a blessing. But if we do manage to keep our faith, then we are blessed. If we look in verse 21, it says to be rich toward God. People who live by this kind of faith that constantly strives to grow, to understand truly what's going on in the world so that I can make the best choices with the best outcomes. This is being rich toward God. Notice that I did not mention charity at all, right? Because charity is not always the answer. If people have are gambling addicted people, then giving them money is like the worst thing you want to do, right? But if we are true believers and we live by faith, it means that we are bringing benefit and good to the world and society. At the very least, it's giving benefit to our families. We're making good choices today so that tomorrow they'll have a better life. I mean, think about this, right? 200 years ago, 250 years ago, 93% of America were farmers. We were all farmers. And so, like, after listening to this podcast episode, you probably have to go out and farm, right? Maybe you are a farmer, but it used to be that 93% of us were farmers. Why aren't we now? Well, because of increased productivity, because people have worked on and solved problems of work which made us more efficient, which made us more productive. And so fewer of us have to be farmers. And, my dad had to farm, uh, during the war, Korean War, because they wouldn't let him in school, so he couldn't study. But he did farming. It's backbreaking work. And so people figured out how to make the work easier, better, so that we can do more work. See, this is the key, right? To be glorifying to God, to be rich towards God, right? We work harder so we can do more. We don't work harder so we can do less. This is our calling. This is why it's so counterintuitive. This is why it doesn't go along with what so many people in the world are saying. We work hard. We try to solve and resolve problems, or expose problems, so that we can come up with better solutions. This is our calling. This is what we do, right? We improve the lives of the people around us so we can do more, right? And the fact that so many people in the United States were so much wealthier than other people in all the world. It made people curious about Christianity. It made people curious and want to ask questions about what is this Christian thing? And we just let it go. We let it slip. And communists have taken over the country, and to the point where they have obfuscated, right? They've confused the use of certain critical words like capitalism, right? Anything bad, they just call capitalism. Anything that might be considered good, they call socialism. We got to testify to the truth of Jesus Christ, show people what is the truth and what is a lie, how inflation is a lie, how everything built on inflation is a lie, and seek true value. And if we do this, we live this kind of life of faith, and God will bless us with eternal life. And with this conviction and assurance of eternal life later in our lives, we can live today peacefully. We can live today in happiness and satisfaction. That's it for today. I hope you have a blessed week, uh, and I'll talk to you next time.